Welcome back to Wildcat Academy. Today we'll be learning about factoring polynomials with four terms. And the method that will help us do that is factor by grouping. So factor by grouping is going to do exactly what it kind of says it's going to do. We're going to group a couple of terms together and we're going to do some factoring that way, and then we're going to group a couple more terms together and we're going to factor GCF out, and then we'll kind of go from there. So in a typical problem, you'll take the first two terms, almost always works like this. You'll take the first two terms and we'll group those together, and we'll group the second group of terms together. So as we're looking at that, we're going to look at these first two terms, and x cubed minus 3x squared, and we're going to factor out the GCF. So we're looking at that. If you aren't familiar with how to factor out a GCF, or if you need a little reminding, go ahead and check out our video. There should be a link right here to that video where you can, it'll definitely be in the description below, where you can learn more about factoring a GCF. So we're going to x cubed minus 3x squared. We're going to factor out an x squared. That will leave us x minus 3. Always do a quick check. X squared times x is x cubed. X squared minus 3 is negative 3x squared. So we've done that correctly. Now in this problem, there doesn't seem to be a GCF. So what we can do, because of factor by grouping, when there is not anything but a 1, we will still go ahead and factor out a positive 1 out to complete factor by grouping. And so we'll factor out that 1, so we end up with a positive x minus 3. Now once we do that, we're at the step here where we'll form two binomials, and we will put the coefficients of our parentheses in one binomial and the x minus 3 in the other. What you're effectively doing is factoring out actually this parenthesis x minus 3 of both larger terms. So there is this first term, and I'm going to factor out an x minus 3, and then this is their second term, and I'm going to factor out an x minus 3. So effectively you will factor that x minus 3 out, and then you will have x squared plus 1, the coefficients of that, in the other parenthesis as your other binomial. You can write these either way. So you could have written them as x squared plus 1 and x minus 3. You might see me do that in the next problem. It really is just dependent upon your style, how you would like to think about and talk about these problems. I think actually most of the time I do write it as x squared plus 1, put the coefficients in that first parenthesis, and I put the other parenthesis, other binomial here as x minus 3. All right, so looking at number 2, so this, again, we're going to group these first two terms together and think about those together, and then the 3x minus 12 together. We're going to factor out, this one's a little more interesting, we're going to factor out a GCF of 2. It looks like we have x squared, because that's the lowest exponent of the two terms with x's, and then we end up with x minus 4. Always do a quick check. 2x squared times x is 2x cubed. 2x squared minus 4 is negative 8x squared. And we do that just simply because if we make a mistake, we want to catch it earlier. We don't want to carry that all the way down to the next problem. So, or the next line rather, in the problem. So we want to add, we're going to factor out, not add, but factor out a positive 3 out of the next binomial. 3x minus 12, that leaves us with x minus 4. We always know we have done this step correctly if we have the same thing inside the parentheses. And I should have talked about that in the first problem, but we have x minus 4 in both parentheses here, so we know that factor by grouping is working, and we're going to be able to use it. Because as you encounter more difficult problems, sometimes you might try factor by grouping and it may not work, and we may have to stop and do another form of grouping or rearrange the terms in order to factor. But that will be a later video if you're interested in that. So we're going to put the coefficients in the first parenthesis, 2x squared plus 3, and then we're going to have x minus 4 as the binomial in the second parenthesis. All right. So example 3, they become even more interesting here. Larger numbers, more variables. So we're going to factor out, looks like an x squared, at least out of these two terms here, and looks like maybe a 4. That will give us a 5x minus 2. We're going to do a quick check. 4x squared times 5x. 4 times 5 is 20. X squared times x is x cubed. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. And then the x squared is accounted for. Here, when this third term is negative, we always want to factor out a negative because we want what's inside the parentheses to be positive. You can see that we want that term right here to be 5x. We're expecting it to be 5x rather. So we want to factor out a minus 3. And that will give us 5x. And then 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. We can see that that's working out for us. We have the same thing in the same binomial inside the parenthesis now. And we can factor that out. We use 4x squared minus 3 and 5x minus 2. And always check, we haven't had any of these because this is just an introductory lesson to factor by grouping, but always check your quadratic binomial to make sure you don't have difference by squares, or difference of squares, sum of cubes, difference of cubes, any of the other binomial factoring methods. Make sure we haven't missed a GCF anywhere. Sometimes there's a GCF all the way through and it'll show up in one of these binomials at the end. We might have to factor out. So in example 4, we're going to factor out, looks like an 8x cubed of the first two terms. So 8 is there, and also lowest degree 8x cubed. So we're going to leave this x squared plus 1. And then we will factor out a positive 3, and that will give us x squared plus 1 out of these two terms. And then we will write our two parentheses, leaving space for making our binomials, 8x cubed plus 3 and x squared plus 1. You see we have higher degree binomials here. Neither one, this is not sum of cubes. This is not sum of, there is no factoring method, sum of squares, so we don't have to worry about it. But always check those to make sure that there is not going to be another factoring step here. And there will be a later video that if you'd like to check it out, then leave the link in the description below. Factor by grouping with GCFs, and where there'll be this extra step down here. It'll be harder factor by grouping problems where there's going to be an extra step of factoring, because we're going to end up with difference of cubes and sum of cubes. So, if you found this video helpful, be sure to hit the like button below, subscribe to the channel to check out our latest videos, and as always, look out for more great videos from Wildcat Academy.